I hadn't even taken my gloves off when the front door swung open, and there he was, my dad. Same stern eyes, same pressed flannel shirt he wore every family dinner. Except this time, instead of a hug or even a nod, he looked at me like I was a stranger. His eyes narrowed. Then he said it. "Get lost. You're not welcome here." No explanation, no hesitation. Just like that. Behind him, through the warm glow of the dining room, I could see my family, my mother, my brother, my cousins laughing around the table, passing plates of food, like I was never supposed to be part of it. I blinked, swallowed hard, and forced a small smile. "Got it," I whispered. And I turned away, boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. 10 minutes later, as I sat shivering in my car, the front door slammed open behind me, and my mother screamed my name. The snow hadn't started yet when I drove into Lark, Missouri, a town so small, the gas station doubled as a post office. It was the kind of place where people still waved at you from their front porch and gossiped through the church bulletin. Once upon a time, this was home. Now, even the air felt tighter here. I hadn't been back in 4 years. Not since my dad told me that real jobs don't involve staring at a screen all day, and my brother repeated it like scripture. Not since my mom said, "It's just a phase, she'll come back once the city chews her up." Well, the city didn't chew me up. Denver became a kind of salvation. I'd built a career as a UX designer, carved out a life with coffee dates, freelance clients, and a walk-up apartment with too little space and too much rent. But it was mine, every inch of it. Still, when Mom called last week, her voice soft, almost uncertain, I listened. "Your dad's calmed down. He misses you, even if he won't say it. Come home, Em. Just for dinner." The phrase, "just for dinner," held years of weight, but something in her voice cracked open a door I thought I'd sealed shut. So I said yes. I booked the flight, I packed the gifts. I even bought one of those awful plaid scarves my dad used to wear and wrapped it with ribbon. Maybe we couldn't fix everything, but maybe we could eat a meal together without feeling like enemies. The closer I got to the house, the more the doubts crept in. The trees lining Elm Street were the same, only barer. The corner bakery was closed for the holidays. The porch light at my old neighbor's house still blinked like it hadn't been fixed since 2006. Everything was exactly the same except me. I parked a little down the street, needing a moment to breathe. The sight of the Carter house hit like a punch to the gut. The wreath on the door, the flickering string lights, the smell of something roasted wafting through the air. It was the same Christmas setup we'd had since I was 5. I checked my lipstick in the mirror, smoothed my coat, picked up the gift bag. I walked up those porch steps with shaking hands. And then, the door opened. Not by Mom, but by Dad. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared, then rolled his eyes like I was a bill collector at dinner time. Then came the words I never thought I'd hear from my father. "Get lost. You're not welcome here." I didn't cry right away. I walked back to my car like I was just heading to the store, like I hadn't been shoved out of my own family's life with 7 words. The wrapped gifts felt like weights in my arms. I dropped them in the passenger seat, sat down, and closed the door. Then I just sat there, in silence. The interior fogged with every shaky breath. My fingers trembled so hard I couldn't put the key in the ignition. So I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and tried to remember why I came here in the first place. Denver wasn't perfect, but at least it was mine. No one slammed doors in my face there. No one made me feel like I was just some unfinished disappointment. I thought about turning around. I could find a motel or even drive back to the airport. I could call Megan, my best friend, back home and tell her the trip was a disaster. She'd tell me to open a bottle of wine and forget them all. But this wasn't just a ruined dinner. This was confirmation. I'd suspected for years that my family saw me as the misfit, the outlier, the girl who left and never looked back. But now I knew. It wasn't that they didn't understand me. It was that they'd chosen not to. I stared back at the house through my iced-over windshield. I could still see shadows moving behind the curtains. Still hear muffled laughter, clinking glasses, someone, probably my aunt, telling a loud story about pie crust. How could they be laughing? How could they be eating while I sat freezing outside, heart bruised, hands clenched around a steering wheel like it was the last thing tethering me to reality? That's when the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. I hated that I was crying over this. I'd spent years building a life outside their expectations. I was strong. I was successful. But I was still their daughter. And being told, out loud, that I wasn't welcome by the man who used to teach me how to ride a bike and grill burgers in the summer was a kind of hurt I didn't know how to prepare for. Then, 10 minutes in, as the snow began to fall harder, there was a thud. A door. I looked up. The front door of the house burst open, and through the swirl of white, my mother appeared, no coat, just a sweater, running down the porch steps, yelling my name. Emily! Emily, wait! I sat frozen, hand on the key, afraid to hope. But she was already halfway to the car, breath fogging in the air, eyes wild with something I hadn't seen from her in years. Not disappointment. Not pity. Panic. I rolled down the window just enough for her voice to reach me. Emily, please don't leave. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her breath came in clouds. She looked ridiculous standing there in her apron and house slippers, snow already collecting in her curls. But her eyes were frantic. I didn't know he'd say that, she said, voice trembling. If I had known. She didn't finish the sentence, because we both knew she wouldn't have stopped him. Not completely. Not unless she had seen my face when he said it. I slowly opened the door. She reached in, grabbing my gloved hands between hers. They were warm from the kitchen, and I hated how comforting that still felt. I told you to come home because I missed you, she whispered. I thought he had softened. I thought we could fix this. He told me to get lost, Mom. I know, her voice cracked. And he was wrong. I studied her face. The tiny lines around her eyes looked deeper than I remembered. She had aged since I left, not just in years, but in weight, emotional weight. Why would he say something like that? I asked. Because he's scared, she said, and angry, and proud. Proud of what? I asked, bitter. Of pretending he's not hurt that you left. That caught me off guard. I'd always seen my dad as the one doing the hurting. The one throwing silent judgments across the dinner table, muttering about real work and people who forget their roots. He doesn't understand your world, Emily. He doesn't know how to support something he doesn't relate to. So he slams doors instead? My mom didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes glistening. I made him promise not to make a scene. I thought if he saw you again, really saw you, he'd soften. But then he saw you on that porch and something snapped. I let out a breath. My hands were still shaking, but the heat from hers was helping. You came out here, I said quietly. You didn't have to. Of course I did, she replied. You're my daughter, and this is your home, too, even if he forgot that for a moment. For the first time in years, I believed her. Behind her, the porch door was still ajar. Through it, I saw movement, me younger brother hovering behind the curtains, eyes wide, uncertain. My mom gave my hand one last squeeze. Come inside, Emily. Please. Let's not let him be the only voice that matters tonight. I followed her up the steps like a guest, not a daughter. The porch creaked under our feet, same sound it made when I used to sneak out for midnight walks in high school. Same spot where Dad used to sit with a beer on summer nights, telling me that Carter kids didn't quit. That was before he decided I had. The front door was still open, not wide, just enough to remind me I'd been shut out minutes earlier. As I stepped inside, the warmth hit me like a memory. Roast chicken, cloves, something sweet, maybe Mom's cinnamon rolls, the kind she only made on holidays. But the comfort of it only made the tension sharper. The room went quiet. Everyone at the table froze. Aunt Linda's fork hovered midair. My cousin Jacob had just taken a sip of wine and looked like he might choke. My younger brother Ben stood up halfway, then sat down again like he'd made a mistake by moving. And my father, he didn't look up. He cut his food, slowly, methodically. Like, I wasn't there. Mom stepped in beside me. Everyone, she said, trying for brightness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emily's joining us for dinner. There was a pause. Then a few murmured greetings. A high M from Ben that sounded too soft. A polite smile from Aunt Linda. Nobody moved. No one offered a chair. Until Grandma Rose, bless her soul, stood up from the end of the table. "She'll sit by me," she said. Her voice had the kind of quiet authority no one in our family dared to question. She pulled out the chair next to Hermie's old seat, the one I used to sit in every Christmas growing up. I nodded and walked over, careful not to look at Dad. I set the gift bag down gently under the table. As I sat, I caught Mom whispering something to my father. He didn't respond, just kept chewing, slowly, deliberately. The clinking of forks resumed, but the conversation didn't. I glanced around. My gifts for everyone were still in my car, probably getting damp from the heater, but now they seemed irrelevant. Nobody asked about my life. Nobody asked why I'd come. I'd stepped into the house, but not back into the family. And that's when I knew being let inside wasn't the same as being let in. For the next 20 minutes, dinner was a battlefield made of glances and scraped plates. Conversations tiptoed around me like I was a ghost. My aunt talked about church fundraisers. Ben mentioned something about new tires. My mother kept offering food as if hospitality could patch over rejection. "Have some chicken, Em. Want more rolls? Here, take the sweet potatoes, you used to love those." She was trying. I knew she was trying. But everything felt performative, like I was an obligation she was determined to fulfill in front of witnesses. Grandma Rose patted my hand once under the table. It was the only human gesture that didn't feel rehearsed. Finally, Ben cleared his throat. "So, Em, how's Denver?" I latched onto it like a lifeline. "It's good. Cold this time of year, but not like here. Workspin Busher team just launched a redesign for a health app. It's getting great feedback." Aunt Linda nodded politely. "You still doing that computer stuff?" I smiled thinly. "UX design, yeah." "Well," my dad muttered, not looking up, "as long as someone finds that useful." My fork froze midair. Ben glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. "I'd say making life easier for sick people is useful," I said, my voice low but steady. Dad finally looked at me. Just a flicker. "You always did have a fancy way of justifying things. Things like moving out? Or existing?" That was the edge. The one we'd all danced around for years. And I just stepped over it. The table went quiet again. Until Grandma sighed and reached for the gravy. "Well, I think it's wonderful. Your generation is doing things we couldn't dream of. Now, pass me the cranberry sauce before I start a war of my own." A few people chuckled, nervously. But the atmosphere stayed thick. Then came the moment I always dreaded, the moment when family dinners turned from passive silence to pointed comparison. "Ben just got promoted," Mom announced brightly. "Lead mechanic now." "That's great," I said, and meant it. "And he still finds time to help out here," Dad added, loud enough to land. "Never too busy for family." I smiled tightly. Sounds like balance is working for him. Not everyone has to move across the country to figure themselves out. There it was. A sentence dressed like a statement, but aimed like a dagger. I pushed my plate back gently, appetite gone. "I didn't move to figure myself out," I said. "I moved so I could finally breathe." That stunned the table into silence. Even Mom didn't know what to say. Across from me, Dad stared, lips pressed into a hard line. I stared back. And that's when I realized we weren't having dinner. We were reenacting a silent war that had started years ago. The plates were mostly cleared when Mom brought out dessert pecan pie and coffee in mismatched mugs. She moved too quickly, like rushing through the final course would make the tension dissolve. "Emily always loved pecan pie," she said, almost too loudly. I didn't have the heart to remind her that I hadn't eaten pecan pie in years. I was allergic to walnuts now. She'd forgotten. I reached for a mug instead. Dad didn't look at me, but I could feel his disapproval like a heat source across the table. He was drinking his coffee black, like always. He still stirred it, even though there was nothing to stir, just a habit. One I used to find endearing. Not tonight. Grandma tried to lift the mood. Remember when Em was 10 and tried to make her own pie crust? We nearly broke our teeth on it. That earned a chuckle from Ben. Even I smiled. But then Dad muttered, "At least back then she still tried." The whole table heard it. Mom's fork clinked against her plate. "Robert." "What?" "I'm not saying anything untrue." "You're saying plenty," I said, calmly. "Just not what you mean." He looked at me then. Fully. Eyes hard. "What I mean is, you used to be a part of this family, before you decided you were too good for all of us." My heart didn't break this time. It hardened. "I didn't decide I was too good," I said. "I decided I wasn't going to keep shrinking myself to fit in." "Oh, please. You ran off to Denver and now you think you're better than us because you sit behind a desk and design buttons for apps." Mom gasped. Ben looked horrified. Aunt Linda suddenly found her napkin extremely interesting. I could have snapped. I wanted to. But instead, I took a breath. "You know what's funny, Dad?" I said softly. "All these years, I kept hoping you'd ask about what I do not, because you'd understand, but because you cared." He flinched slightly. "But you don't ask. You just assume. And then you punish me for the version of me you built in your head." The room held its breath. I stood up slowly. "I didn't come here to argue. I came because Mom asked. Because I thought maybe there was still a door left open." I turned to my mother. "But you can't invite someone in and let someone else push them out." I walked toward the front hallway, heart racing but strangely steady. "Wait," Grandma called after me. "Don't go." I paused. Just for a moment. Behind me, Dad muttered something I couldn't hear. And then louder. She always was dramatic. I turned my head slightly, but didn't look back. "No," I said. I just finally stopped staying quiet. I stood in the foyer, coat half on, fingers trembling not from the cold, but from everything I'd swallowed for years. The front door loomed ahead. I could walk through it. Again. This time for good. But something in me refused to move. I turned around. Slowly. Deliberately. The entire table froze. "No," I said aloud. "Not this time." My mother was halfway to standing, face drawn with concern. Ben looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Grandma's lips were pressed tight in worry. "And Dad?" He just raised an eyebrow, like he was daring me to continue. So I did. "I'm not dramatic," I said calmly. "I'm not looking for attention. I'm not trying to embarrass you." "Then what are you doing?" Dad asked sharply. Finally speaking. The room was silent but charged. You could hear the fireplace crackle, the wind tapping against the window pane. "For years, I've tried to be the kind of daughter who wouldn't rock the boat," I continued. I changed the subject when things got uncomfortable. I laughed off the digs. I convinced myself that being tolerated was better than being rejected. Dad shifted in his seat. "But being tolerated isn't love, it's survival. And I'm done surviving family dinners." "Don't turn this into some victim speech," Dad snapped. "You left." "I left," I said, "because I couldn't breathe. Because every word out of my mouth was met with a sigh or a look or a backhanded joke." I turned to the others. "You all saw it. Maybe you didn't mean to take sides, but you did. When no one says anything, that is saying something." Ben's eyes dropped to the table. Aunt Linda looked away. I still called. I still sent birthday gifts. I still asked if anyone wanted to visit. No one came. And yet somehow I'm the one who left. My mother was crying now. "I thought if I got the job, the apartment, the life, maybe then I'd finally earn my place back here." I looked at Dad. But I realized, no, it was never about earning anything. It was about refusing to become what made you comfortable. He leaned back in his chair, defensive, silent. "You say I think I'm better than this family?" I said. "I don't. I just think different doesn't mean less." That's when Grandma Rose stood up. She didn't say anything right away, just made her way over and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You have more courage than all of us put together," she said softly, "and it's about time someone said these things." Ben stood up next. "She's right," he said. "I let it slide because I didn't want to upset anyone. But I've seen it, Dad. The way you shut her down. The way you made her feel small." My father finally looked like something cracked in his armor. Just slightly. "You always wanted a version of Emily that stayed close, got married, young, had babies, and taught Sunday school," Ben continued. "But that's not who she is." "That's not who I am," I echoed. Silence. Then my mom stepped forward. "I didn't realize how much I contributed to this until tonight," she said, wiping her eyes. "I thought I was playing peacekeeper, but I see now. I was helping him build a wall between you and all of us." Dad still hadn't spoken. "I don't need your approval anymore," I told him. "But I'm not going to keep showing up just to be humiliated. If you want me in your life, you have to show up for real, not just sit at a table and pretend I'm not there." He stood then, slowly. His voice, when it came, was low, tired. "I don't know how to talk to you," he admitted. "I don't understand your world. Every time I see your name on something fancy, I feel like I've been left behind." "You haven't been left behind," I said. "You've just refused to walk beside me." That hit him. He rubbed a hand over his face. For the first time in years, he looked smaller, human, not the towering figure who used to intimidate me into silence. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I should have opened the door differently." Tears welled in my eyes. "That would have been a good start." He nodded. "Maybe we can start now." I looked around the room. My mother, my brother, my grandmother, all watching, waiting. "I'm willing to try," I said. Later that night, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with a slice of untouched pie, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and the strangest feeling in my chest, quiet. Not the quiet of being ignored. The quiet of being heard. My dad didn't say much after that moment in the dining room, but he didn't disappear either. He stood beside me while I washed dishes. He didn't make jokes or throw out a compliment like a bandage. He just stayed. That meant more than words ever could have. Grandma had retired early, but before heading to bed, she kissed my forehead and whispered, "Don't let them forget this moment. These truths crack things open." Ben helped me bring the rest of the gifts in from the car. He didn't say much either, just nudged my shoulder and said, "About time, huh?" Mom offered me fresh towels and said she'd made up my old room. There was a candle lit on the nightstand and a new blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Lavender, like I always liked. "Thank you for not leaving," she said, standing in the doorway. "Thank you for coming after me," I replied. Then she asked quietly, "Will you stay for breakfast?" "Yeah," I said, after a long pause. "I'll stay." I lay in bed that night staring at the same glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling as a teenager. Most had fallen off. A few still clung stubbornly, glowing faint green in the dark. I thought about the little girl who had once stared up at them and wished for escape. And the woman lying here who no longer needed to escape anything, but who finally had the courage to return and be seen as herself. The next morning, when I came downstairs, the table was already half set. My dad was cracking eggs, sleeves rolled up. He looked up when he saw me, and for a second, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty and effort. "Hope you're hungry," he said. "Starving," I replied. He nodded, then added, "You can do the toast. You always liked burning it anyway." It was a small thing, but it was something. Maybe we wouldn't fix everything overnight. Maybe we wouldn't agree on politics, or city life, or what counted as a real job. But maybe, just maybe, we were done pretending. As I reached for the bread, I realized I had walked back into this house expecting the same cold door to close again. Instead, I found something else. A crack, just wide enough to let the light in,